right, let's do problems 8 and 9. So here I have an empty main method, which I'm going to use to test. Here I've got the two empty methods that were the assignment that you were supposed to implement. So they were add leading silence and extract sample. Okay, and then there's a description of what it's supposed to do here and a description of the parameters. I hope you recognize this as the Java docs that I talked about in problem set 1. These problems, I think, maybe even came from an AP test of the past. Like, these are legit AP problems. All right, so add leading silence. So the nice thing about an array list as opposed to an array is that you can insert values at the beginning of the list and everything else kind of slides down. Because array lists can contract and expand as you remove and add things to them. So here's my favorite so before we actually program this, let's make our kind of test cases up here that we're going to use. So I'm going to make an array list of integer. I'm going to call it audio equals new array list. Let's fill it with some random values. So let's do I equals 0, I less than, I don't know, 1,000. And now let's say audio.add integer math.random times, I don't know, 255. Okay, so I'm generating a bunch of random values and I'm adding them to the list. All right, so now let's do this, and then let's display it. So let's print audio, and then let's run add leading silence, and let's give it our audio input. Or see, this first input needs to match my actual name up here, and then length. Let's add, I don't know, let's add length 10 at the beginning that are zeros. It's going to let's overwrite the old value of audio, and then let's print it out again. Okay, cool. All right, so let's do a solution that slightly doesn't work, and then let's do one that does work. So it says return a copy of the sample with length leading 0. So it says a copy of sample, where sample, of course, is this thing. If it didn't say return a copy, I could do this. I could say let's loop a bunch of times. So let's loop length times, because length is the number of zeros I want to add. So I want to repeat that many times. And then let's say sample.add 0, 0. So see how my editor here filled in index and element? So there's several different versions of the add method. If you have two inputs like this, I'm saying add a 0 at index 0. So that's like inserting a 0 at the very beginning of the list, and everything else slides down. And if I'm doing that over and over and over again, how many zeros am I adding? I'm adding length. I'm adding that many zeros. And so then at the end, I could just return sample, because I've actually inserted all of these things at the beginning of sample. Let's sort of look at that and make sure that works. So if I run it now, great. So you see it's got some random values, and then after I run the code, I've got some zeros that were inserted at the very beginning there. So that's working. The problem is, even though it's working, it doesn't actually do what was requested, because it says return a copy of sample. It says don't actually change sample, return a copy of sample. So instead what we want to do is something like this. Let's make a new array list called copy, array list. And now let's loop over sample and add all the things to copy. I think I'm going to use a for each loop. So I'll say integer value, and then I'm going to loop over sample. So if you're not familiar with this kind of for loop, we'll talk more about it during the year, but this is exactly the same as looping over every single element of sample and taking each number inside the sample list and assigning it to this val variable one by one. And so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my copy and I'm going to add that value. So at the end of this is, so copy, all I'm doing is I'm looping over the sample array, I'm getting out each value, and I'm adding it to the copy array. So at the end of this, copy is the same as val. Now I can do the same thing I would have done, only with copy, and then I'll return copy. And so now this has not changed. Well, let's do this. Let's say array list integer result. And so now I can show you that result contains the leading zeros, but the original one hasn't changed. So here we go. Here it is before I've done anything. Here it is after adding the leading zeros, and you can see that the original audio list hasn't changed. But here, the result that got returned has inserted the zeros. All right, cool. Let's do that same thing now, or a similar thing, but for extract sample. So to extract a sample, I want to do the same thing. I want to create an array list that is going to hold my answer. Only this time, I'm going to loop I starting at start, ending at end. And now I want to say copy.add. And what do I want to add? I want to add sample.getI. So sample.getI gets out the number at location I. And now I'm taking that number that was in sample, and I'm adding it to copy. And now I return copy. So let's see if that works now. So let's change this to extract sample. Let's do start is, what do I do? Start and end, right? Yeah. So let's start at 10 and let's end at 14. And let's see what it looks like when I run it. Great, so here's the original one. This is location 10, and you see that I get out just between 10 and 14 here. So I've exerted that part. I've extracted just that part. I should also note that this works even if you do something nonsensical like this. So if my start is 14 and my end is 7, this is just going to return an empty list because the start happens after the end, and that doesn't make any sense. Okay, I think that's all. Great.